What's the simplest comeback you've ever given that completely ended someone's behavior? Years ago, I went through Navy boot camp, and I got there on what everyone quietly called jail or sail, which means a judge gave me a choice between prison and enlisting, and I took the Navy. A lot of guys who come in that way show up angry, like the world owes them something. I went the other way. I knew a court had handed me a second chance I probably did not deserve, and I was not going to waste it. I was not the sharpest recruit in the division. I fumbled drill, I blanked on my knowledge, I made the same mistakes everybody else made, but I never complained, I never made excuses, and when I got corrected, I just said, "Yes, petty officer," and worked harder. Most of the division respected that. One guy did not, and his name was Beck. I had Beck pegged as a high school bully inside a day. He was the type always hunting for someone below him to stand on, and he decided that someone was me. Somehow he found out about the jail or sail thing, and he would not let it go. He called me a criminal under his breath during drill. He would lean over at chow and tell the table, "Watch your gear, we have got a convict sitting with us." I mostly ignored it, which only made him push harder. What made it worse was that Beck was good at the game. He knew how to look sharp the second the RDCs were watching, how to snap to and say the right things so they liked him. He got made a recruit petty officer, one of the small leadership spots, and it went straight to his head. The job came with the duty log, a clipboard where the recruit petty officer wrote down who cleaned the head, who stood which watch, and who counted gear at what hour. Beck signed the bottom of every page. That log is going to matter more than anything I could have said out loud, so keep it in your head. Beck used it like a weapon aimed right at me. Every day that week I was scrubbing toilets, standing the worst watches, or counting gear at hours when everyone else was getting what little rest they could. He would announce it too. "And of course he is cleaning," he said once to the whole compartment. "That is basically community service. He is used to it." A few guys laughed because they were scared not to. "You should be thanking me," he told me another time. "Somebody has to remind you that you do not really belong here. The rest of us earned our spot." I kept folding my shirts and said nothing, and every time I stayed quiet, he took it as a win. For weeks it looked like he had it made. The RDCs saw a squared-away recruit petty officer, and the rest of us saw a bully who had learned how to hide it. A couple of the other guys tried to say something about how Beck treated people, but he was so polished in front of the RDCs that it went nowhere. And when he heard about it, he rode me harder, sure that nothing was ever going to stick to him. Then came the day it turned, and it turned on a single sentence. I got smoked for some small thing, my rack was not tight enough, or my locker was off, one of those tiny infractions they hammer you for. So there I was, down on the deck, getting IT'd, pushing and sweating in front of everybody, and Beck decided this was his moment. He stood over me and said, loud enough for the whole compartment to hear, "Look at him, what a loser." I was not even out of breath yet, and I looked up at him and said, "A judge punished me by ordering me to join an organization that you chose to sign up for on your own, and I am the loser?" That was it. That was the whole thing. Beck opened his mouth, and nothing came out, because there was nothing he could say. One of the RDCs turned around and pretended to study the bulkhead so he would not laugh. The whole compartment heard it, and everybody understood exactly what had just happened. He had spent weeks calling me a criminal to make himself feel bigger, and without throwing one insult back, I had pointed out that he signed up for the exact same life I got sentenced to. From that second on, Beck was not the top dog anymore. A bully's whole act depends on nobody pushing back, and the moment I pushed back and won, the spell broke. People stopped being wary of him and started seeing him as the joke he was. You could even measure it at chow. Before that day, I would grab my tray and find whatever empty spot was left, usually the end of a table where nobody had to look at me. After it, guys started saving me a seat. Nothing dramatic, just someone scooting over, someone nodding at the open spot like it had been waiting for me. One morning, a recruit I had barely spoken to slid a folded scrap of paper across the table while the RDCs were not looking. I opened it under the table and it said, "Jail or sail, still funnier than Beck." I almost choked on my eggs. I kept that stupid little note in my pocket for the rest of boot camp. It changed something in me too. I stopped worrying about whether I belonged and started proving I did. My drill got sharper, my knowledge recall got faster, and one afternoon an RDC pulled me aside and said, "You are improving faster than most recruits I have seen. Keep it up." Nobody in charge of anything had ever told me I was doing a good job in my entire life. Not a teacher, not a coach, not a boss. I held onto it the same way I held onto the note. Dominic was the one who kept me steady. He was a quiet guy who bunked near me, the kind of recruit who did not say much but saw everything, and he was the one person who never treated me different after the jail or sail thing got around. One night, after my second watch in a row, he looked up from his knowledge book and said, "He is stacking the schedule against you on purpose." I counted, "You have had double the duties of anyone else this week." I said, "I know." "So what are you going to do about it?" he asked. I could have gone to the RDCs and laid out the pattern, but I knew how that plays. Beck would act surprised, apologize in that fake polished way, and I would be the jail or sail guy who complained about extra work in boot camp. So I said, "Let him tire himself out every time he has to think about me, that his energy he is not spending on himself." Dominic shook his head, but he did not argue, and I could tell he respected it even if he thought I was crazy. By then, the stacked watches had hollowed me out in a way I could feel in my hands, the kind of tired where your bones go heavy and your brain takes an extra second to finish a thought, and I did every single duty without one complaint or one dirty look, because the second I gave Beck a reaction was the second he got something out of me. I did not know how right I was until a few days later, when the RDCs called the division together and announced a major inspection was coming, a full evaluation where everything gets graded and everything counts. Then they dropped the part that changed everything. Recruit petty officers, they said, would be evaluated on their leadership, and part of that grade would be based on how their assigned personnel performed. I watched Beck's face do the math and not like the answer. If I looked bad, he looked bad. For the first time in weeks, he needed me to succeed, and he could not stack duties on me and hope I cracked, because if I cracked, it splashed back on him. That evening, he came up to me while I was prepping my area, his voice tight and forced. "Make sure your rack is squared away for inspection," he said. "I am not getting marked down because of you." I looked at him, calm, and said, said. I always square my rack away. You just never noticed because you were too busy talking. He reached for that old bag of insults and there was nothing in it. He turned and walked away, and behind me I heard Dominic swallow a laugh. But I was not laughing because I saw something in Beck's face I had never seen before, and it was not anger, it was worry. The night before the inspection, I prepped everything perfect. Rack tight, locker organized, uniforms pressed, socks rolled to standard. I turned in knowing that for once my performance would reflect well on both of us. I woke at 0400 to find my locker rearranged, shirts refolded wrong, items shifted into the wrong compartments, my rolled socks pulled loose. Someone had gone through my things while I slept, and they had been careful about it, messing it up just enough to fail, not trashing it like a vandal so that it would read as a recruit who prepped badly rather than a locker somebody sabotaged. Dominic woke and saw me standing in front of the open door. What happened? He asked. Somebody got into my locker, I said. He did not even hesitate. Beck, he said. He had the watch last night. He was the only one up. I stood there running through my options. I could report it, but it would be my word against a recruit petty officer with a clean face, and I already knew which way that goes for a jail or sale guy making accusations. Or I could say nothing and fail inspection, which is exactly what he built it to do. Either way, on the surface, Beck won. So I did not argue about it. I looked at Dominic and said, I am fixing it, all of it, right now. I did not ask for help, but he got off his rack without a word and started refolding shirts the right way. We worked in the dark for 90 minutes, refolding every shirt, re-rolling every pair of socks, checking every item against the layout I had memorized weeks ago. My hands were shaking from the adrenaline, and there was a moment 40 minutes in where I could not get one shirt to fold right, and Dominic reached over, said give it to me, folded it clean in 10 seconds, and handed it back. We finished with 5 minutes to spare. It was not as perfect as the night before, because nothing done in a rush ever is, but it was good enough. Here is the part Beck never understood. While I was standing at my open locker at 0400, before I touched a single shirt, I did one other thing. I got a small notebook out of my own gear, the kind we were allowed for writing letters home, and I wrote down the time, the date, the exact state my locker was in, and the fact that the watch bill had one name on it for that stretch of the night. Then I woke the recruit whose rack was on the other side of mine, a guy who had no reason to like me or dislike me, and I asked him one quiet question. Did you hear anyone moving around my locker last night? He rubbed his eyes and said, yeah, around 0330, I figured it was you. I wrote that down too, with his name next to it, and I asked Dominic to initial the bottom of the page as a witness that this was written before inspection, not after. I did not know yet what I was going to do with it. I just knew that a story is nothing and a record is something. And the difference between the two was the only ground I had that Beck could not take from me. When Beck came down the row before formation to admire his work, his eyes went to my locker, and I watched his face miss a step like a man skipping a stair. Everything was squared away, every shirt folded right, every item in place, the rack tight. He looked at my locker for a long second, then looked at me, and I held his eye and said nothing. He looked away first. He always looked away first now. The inspection went smooth. The RDC came down the line, checked my locker, my rack, my uniform, and gave me a single sharp nod, which in boot camp is basically a standing ovation. A few spots down, I heard him stop at Beck. Recruit Petty Officer Beck, is that a wrinkle on your uniform? Yes, Petty Officer, Beck said, his voice tight, and the RDC marked something on his clipboard and moved on. Beck had spent so much of the night in my locker that he had not finished his own prep, and now it showed. That would have been a satisfying enough place for it to end, but the hardest part of boot camp was still in front of all of us, and it was going to show everybody in the open who Beck really was under the polish. The final phase was a single overnight event, a long stretch built to test physical endurance, teamwork, and mental toughness all at once, running on no sleep and pure willpower. Here's the thing nobody tells you about the jail or sale path. When a judge sends you to the Navy instead of prison, you do not get months to train first. You show up in whatever shape you are in, and mine was not great because I had spent the weeks before boot camp sitting in a courtroom, then a waiting room, then on a bus. So when we hit a timed carry in the middle of that night, my arms gave out. Not slowly, just done. I had to set the equipment on the deck, and an RDC was in my face in a second, shouting, "Pick it up, your team is counting on you." For a moment, the old voice came back, the one that said, "You do not belong here. You are a criminal playing dress up, and this is where everybody finds out," and I could not make my hands move. Then Dominic was next to me. He did not give a speech. He shifted his own load to take a little of the weight off mine and said, "We finish together or not at all. Pick it up." I picked it up. My shoulders felt like they were coming apart, but I moved, and we made the end of the station before the timer ran out. Beck, meanwhile, was falling apart, but not the way I was. His body was fine. He had come in fit and stayed fit and could carry anything they put in front of him. His problem was everything else. At a team problem-solving station, he did what Beck always did. He started barking, "Move that here." "No, not like that. Listen to me." I said, "Move it." And for the first time, the recruits in his section did not jump. One of them shifted the gear a different way than Beck told him. And when Beck snapped at him, the guy did not even look up. Another recruit started quietly giving his own directions, and the section followed him instead. Beck got louder. I said, "Move it to the left. Are you guys deaf?" And one recruit finally turned and said, "Just let someone else lead, Beck." Not with anger, just the way you would tell a man it is raining. Beck pulled himself up straight and said, "I am the recruit petty officer. I give the orders." And the recruit looked at him and said, "Then give ones that make sense." Beck opened his mouth to fire back, and his voice cracked, an actual crack in the middle of a word that everybody heard, and he tried to cover it by getting louder, which was the worst thing he could have done, because the RDCs were watching for exactly that. The recruit who loses control and blames the people around him. I watched it from my own station with my arms shaking and my lungs burning, and I understood something that carried me through the rest of the night. My body was failing me, but my head was clear, and Beck was the opposite. His body worked fine, and his head had come apart, and a broken body can still move while a broken head just stops. The last event was a simulated damage control scenario, the whole division working a chain of timed tasks under noise and pressure, and the RDCs had already told the recruit petty officers that their team's performance was their performance, no separating the two. Beck's section fell apart almost at once. He gave an order that did not make sense. Two recruits asked him to repeat it, and instead of making it clearer, he made it louder, the same words at twice the volume, and a piece of equipment went the wrong way down the chain. Then he panicked and lunged in and grabbed the gear himself, which broke the whole sequence. And when the RDC told him to get his team organized, he turned to the two recruits who had only been trying to do their jobs and said, "This is not my fault. You guys are not listening." The RDC did not yell. He just looked at Beck for a long moment and said, in a voice that carried across the room, "A leader who blames his team is not a leader. Reset now." Every recruit in the division heard it. I kept my head down and did my piece, calling out gear before it reached me, confirming what I received, making sure the next man was ready before I let go. Nothing impressive, just clear and reliable. And one of the RDCs near my section caught my eye and nodded. I did not need to say a word about Beck to anybody, because Beck was burying himself with his own hands in front of every person who mattered, and all I had to do was keep moving. But none of that, the wrinkle, the crack in his voice, the blame, was the thing that formally finished him, because boot camp does not run on the way a night felt. It runs on the record, and the record was the leadership evaluation. The way the evaluation worked, each recruit, petty officer sat down with two RDCs and walked through how he had run his people. And the RDCs had the paperwork in front of them, the duty log included, because the duty log was Beck's own account of his leadership in his own hand. When it was my section's turn to be discussed, one of the RDCs was flipping through the log and slowed down. He had noticed something on his own before I said a word. He turned the clipboard to face me and asked, "Is this schedule accurate? Is this really how the watches fell that month?" I said it was, and that I had kept my own count if it helped, and I set my notebook on the table. I did not accuse Beck of anything out loud. I did not need to. I let the two records sit next to each other, and I let the RDCs read them. Beck's own log showed, in his own writing and under his own signature at the bottom of every page, that he had assigned me roughly double the watches and duties of any other recruit in the section across 3 straight weeks. My notebook showed the same totals from the other direction, which meant his numbers were not a mistake or a memory, they were real. The RDC read a few of the dates aloud, flat, one after another, my name on the watch line 3 and 4 and 5 nights running, while other recruits went whole weeks without a single late one, and with every date he read, the table got quieter. And then there was the last page. The watch bill for the night before inspection had exactly one recruit petty officer signed on for the middle of the night, initialed BK at the bottom in Beck's own hand, and next to it in my notebook was the time my locker was found disturbed, 0400, and under that, the line I had written before inspection with the neighbor's name and his own words, "Heard someone at the locker around 0330, and Dominic's initials witnessing that I had written all of it down that morning, not after. The RDCs did not raise their voices. They called the neighbor recruit in and asked him the same question I had asked at 0400, and the recruit, who had nothing to gain either way, said the same thing he had said in the dark, that he heard someone at my locker around 0330 and had assumed it was me. Then they called Dominic in, and he confirmed the notebook was written that morning. 3 documents and 2 witnesses, and every one of them traced back to something Beck had signed or done himself. He had built the whole trap with his own hand, the schedule in his own writing, the watch bill with his own initials, the sabotage on the one night the bill put him alone and awake, and all I had done was write down what already existed and lock in the neighbor's memory before Beck could get to it. There was nothing for him to argue with, because none of it was my word. It was his log, his signature, his watch, and a witness who did not care about either of us. When they brought Beck in and laid the pages in front of him, he looked at the log, then the watch bill, then the notebook, and I watched the same thing happen to his face that had happened at my locker, the man missing the stare, except this time, there was no recovery step under him. He did not deny it. He could not, because denying the sabotage meant explaining why the schedule in his own hand had buried one recruit for 3 weeks, and explaining the schedule meant admitting he had run his section like a grudge. Whichever thread he pulled, the rest came with it. He said quietly that he did not have anything to add. That was all. The evaluation ended. The RDCs closed the folder, and Beck kept the title on paper for another few days, but everyone in that division already knew what the paper said. At graduation, the division formed up for the last time. Families filled the stands, parents and girlfriends and brothers and sisters clapping and taking pictures, and I did not have anybody up there. No parents, no friends, no family, just me and the uniform I had earned. I was not sad about it. I had walked into that place because a judge gave me a choice, and I had walked through every single day of it on my own 2 feet. Afterward, in the crowd, Beck passed me. We made eye contact, and he stopped. For a second, I thought he had one last shot in him. One more comment about jail or sale, about criminals, about not belonging, and I braced for it out of habit. But his face was not the polished mask or the sneer. It was just a tired, honest face. He leaned in close enough that nobody else could hear and said, "I was wrong about you." 5 words. I looked at him and nodded once and said, "I know." He held my eyes for one more second, then turned and walked away into the crowd. He did not apologize and he did not explain, and I did not need him to, because I had already proven everything that mattered on the deck, at my locker at 0400, on that overnight, and on the page. I had walked in as a sentence and I was walking out as a sailor, and the difference was never a comeback anyone could shout. It was a record nobody could rewrite. His initials were at the bottom of every page. The RDC closed the folder, slid it into the drawer, and did not open it again.